Number 1.
At 9 a.m. on June 27, 2000, Molly and her mother had found out one of her soccer teammates had been hit by a car while biking to work and had been seriously injured. While she was upset upon hearing the news, Molly still chose to go to work that morning, as it was the summer's first day of swim lessons and only her 8th day on the job. At 9:50 a.m., the two stopped at the local convenience store to grab some water bottles, something that was captured on surveillance footage. Afterward, they drove to the police station to pick up the required two-way radio. As there were no telephones or communications at Commons Pond, the radio was the only way the lifeguards could contact police or anyone outside of the area. Molly and her mother arrived at the pond at 10 a.m., and minutes later the first swimmers of the day arrived. One of the first parents to arrive at Commons Pond noticed that Molly wasn't at her station, yet the lifeguard's chair, whistle and her sandals were. Her first aid kit was also open. Given she was 16 years old, it was assumed she'd walked off with friends, and one of the mothers assumed the position of lifeguard for the lessons, after which she informed Molly's boss of her absence. At 11:44 a.m., Molly's boss, via the two-way radio, reported to police that Molly had gone missing. The Warren Police Department didn't take the report seriously, assuming she'd ditched work to hang out with her friends. When 1 p.m. rolled around and Molly still hadn't returned to her post, the police notified her parents, where they were informed by Maggie that her daughter had been dropped off at work earlier that day. Upon hanging up with police, Maggie called Heather to inform her of the situation. Heather agreed with her mother that something was wrong, so they met at the police station, where they were told there was nothing to be concerned about. According to the authorities, Molly was probably upset about her friend being hurt and had gone to blow off some steam. Maggie and Heather set to work looking for their missing family member. They checked to see if anyone had visited her friend at the hospital and found Molly hadn't been amongst her visitors. Heather also went to her boyfriend's house, but he hadn't heard from her all day. Like the police, he wasn't too concerned. Despite not being worried, Molly's boyfriend and Heather drove to the pond to meet with Maggie, where they wondered why Molly hadn't taken her shoes with her if she'd gone off on her own. While there, Maggie argued with police and said her daughter wouldn't have left her post as she'd been worried about the kids starting swim lessons. After talking more with the family, the officers began to think they were onto something and thus called in the state police to help, as they hadn't much experience working on missing persons cases. Upon being brought on, the state police wondered if Molly could have drowned in the pond, something her family immediately disagreed with, as she was a strong swimmer. This theory upset John Jr., who ran into the water in search for his sister, only to be pulled out by authorities. A dive team and boats were brought in to search the pond, but after several hours they had found nothing, and the search, along with the one of the woods, was called off until morning. At 6 a.m. on June 28, law enforcement deployed all units, including a helicopter with infrared imaging and a mounted unit. As well, townspeople initiated their own search parties, and businesses printed and posted missing persons flyers on their storefronts. Police began to look at a path that led from the beach at Commons Pond to a nearby cemetery, as they thought if someone had abducted Molly, they could have exited the area through this path and not been seen. As well, since Molly's first aid kit was open, those investigating speculated that someone could have faked an injury and she was abducted while trying to help them. Upon hearing this, Maggie realized that she might have seen who abducted her daughter, as she remembered seeing a suspicious-looking man at the pond the day before she disappeared. According to Maggie, the morning had started out like any other, but when she and Molly arrived at the pond they noticed a white vehicle parked in the parking lot. While Maggie watched her daughter, she noticed the man in the vehicle was watching her too. As he appeared to be glaring at her, Maggie stayed with Molly while she organized her station and only left upon the man eventually pulling out of the parking lot. Molly hadn't been worried about him, thinking he was just another fisherman. When asked for a description of the man, Maggie described him as approximately 50 years old with salt and pepper hair. He had dark eyes, a mustache and had been smoking a cigarette. She worked with an artist to make a composite sketch of the unknown man, and when shown the image, John Jr. didn't recognize him as a regular of Commons Pond. Upon learning about the encounter, Police set up a roadblock and asked townspeople about the vehicle, where they learned it had been seen at the cemetery near Commons Pond a few days prior. As well, the district attorney's office ordered a search of 125 white vehicles from the area, but given they couldn't determine the type of vehicle Moggy had seen, it didn't result in any new leads. Thousands of tips were called in from across the United States regarding the man, but they didn't result in anything. When police returned to Commons Pond, they found the scene had been contaminated by those who had first responded. There were too many new fingerprints and footprints, and they found a ton of used cigarettes. As such, they were unable to find any concrete evidence. Since they had no evidence to work on, police began to think up theories about what had happened to Molly. One was that she could have voluntarily left, as there were reported sightings from across the country, but her family firmly believed she wouldn't have left without telling them. Another was that she knew her attacker. While her boss and her boyfriend were considered persons of interest at first, the former had an alibi and the latter, while uncooperative with the investigation, passed a polygraph test. Hoping to uncover some new leads, investigators looked into the area's sex offenders. While they checked for alibis, that proved to be difficult, as many were not gainfully employed. Several were called in for polygraphs, and some showed signs of deception. Detectives also ran through John Sr.'s old cases, in case someone could have taken Molly as an act of revenge, but most of those spoken to only had kind words to say about him. In May 2003, 2 unrelated tips came in, saying Molly had been sighted in Miami, Florida. Investigators were prepared to make a trip down to Florida to follow up on it, until on May 16 they received a tip from a retired cop who believed the missing girl's disappearance was related to the 1993 abduction and murder of another young girl, Holly Pyrainen. In 1993, Holly and her brother were visiting their grandmother in Sturbridge, Massachusetts. While out with her brother, she disappeared and only her shoe was found. During the investigation into Holly's disappearance, Molly had sent a letter to the Pyrainen family, letting them know that she hoped Holly would return home safely. However, Holly's remains would later be found by hunters in the woods near where she went missing. Her killer was never identified. Given both girls were blonde and blue-eyed, were taken from isolated areas, and were in close proximity to each other, investigators looked into the possibility that the same person who murdered Holly was responsible for Molly's disappearance. As such, hunters from the local area were interviewed, with one saying he'd seen something suspicious months earlier, but at the time, had thought nothing of it. Going off the hunter's tip, police went to a wooded area in Palmer, Massachusetts, and discovered a piece of cloth that appeared to be part of a blue bathing suit, the same color as the one Molly had been wearing when she disappeared. It was sent away to have DNA tests performed on it. Upon discovering the piece of cloth, a massive search was done of the area, covering 500 areas. It was the largest search in Massachusetts history. 6 days into it, DNA testing proved the suit to belong to Molly. On June 3, 2003, police searching Whiskey Hill in Palmer discovered a human bone that belonged to someone aged 14 to 20. After more searching, a total of 26 more bones were recovered. DNA testing confirmed them to be Molly. However, the search brought up no evidence that would point investigators to her killer. On August 2, 2003, Molly was buried on what would have been her 20th birthday. After finding Molly, police believed their suspect to be a white male between the ages of 18 to 50 who was known to the area through either hunting or fishing. He most likely had a history of violence against women. In 2005, a Connecticut resident was charged with attempted kidnapping in Connecticut. For a time they were briefly under investigation in connection to Molly's case. In order to help bring in new leads, the Bish family hired private investigator Tom Shamshak. In February 2008, a man named Rodney Stanger was arrested in Marion County, Florida for the murder of his girlfriend. The reason why he'd caught the attention of Massachusetts police was that someone had called the district attorney's office saying he was involved in Molly's murder, based on a conversation with his dead girlfriend. During the time of Molly's disappearance and murder, Stanger, who shared a resemblance to the composite sketch of the man Moggy had seen, had lived in the Warren area and was an avid fisherman and hunter who fished at Commons Pond. He was known to have a violent history and had moved from Southbridge, Massachusetts to Summerfield, Florida about a year after Molly disappeared. His brother also owned a white Chrysler that looked similar to the vehicle Moggy had seen. Stanger was interviewed but denied any involvement in Molly's case. He would later plead guilty to his girlfriend's murder and is currently serving time in prison. In 2012, police searched Stanger's home after his deceased girlfriend's sister claimed to have found suspicious materials. Upon finding his Massachusetts-issued firearms ID, it was found he looked extremely similar to the mystery man Moggy had seen at the pond. A witness would later come forward to say they'd seen a man who matched Stanger's description in the Commons Pond parking lot just minutes before Molly and her mother arrived. A local worker also reported seeing a similar car parked at the cemetery that was down the path from the pond. Stanger was also questioned in connection with the 1993 murder of Holly Pyrainen. He has not been charged in relation to either case. Police began testing the DNA of persons of interest against the DNA they'd gathered in the case and against some of the evidence. They've also asked people to voluntarily submit their DNA for testing. In 2011, Gerald Battistoni was named a suspect in the case by private investigator Dan Malley. At the time he was announced as a suspect, he was serving time for raping a teenager in the 1990s, and he was initially a confidential informant for the Eastern Hampton County Narcotics Task Force. When police looked into his possible involvement in not only Molly's case, but Holly's as well, they found he'd been in the area where Molly's remains were found and that he resembled the composite sketch. After being named a suspect in the two cases, he attempted suicide. He would later die in prison in November 2014. In 2013, a new racetrack was being dug in the area near where Molly's remains were found, so investigators educated the construction crew on what to look for. They informed the crew on what Molly had been wearing and that they might find human remains, as not all of her bones had been found back in 2003. Cadaver dogs were brought in to see if any scents were released into the air. In 2014, a partially buried bag was found underneath a log in the woods near Nenemsic Sportsman's Club in Palmer by a private investigator. The area was across the road from where Molly's remains had been found. Inside the bag were a pair of plaid boxer shorts that were similar to the ones Molly had been wearing the day she went missing. Later that year, a judge dismissed a lawsuit brought forward by a former police officer against the Worcester District Attorney's Office, who said he deserved a $100,000 reward for leading investigators to the remnants of Molly's bathing suit back in 2003. He claimed to have learned about the bathing suit from a hunter who saw it, and his lawyer said some posters related to the case had indicated the reward money would be paid for information leading to Molly. According to the district attorney's office, the posters were put up by an independent foundation, and law enforcement had made it clear that the reward was for information leading to an arrest and conviction. In 2014, the Bish family held a campaign called Just One Piece, which resulted in 4 different people coming forward to identify a new person of interest in the case. While some of this information has been withheld, as to not jeopardize the investigation, what had been shared says that witnesses recalled seeing a man visit an old campground in West Brookfield, Massachusetts, just a few miles from where Molly was taken, and had left the same day she disappeared. According to the witnesses, he had returned the day after, and his face was bloody and scratched. He had been yelling about something bad happening in the woods the night before, and 6 months later he was heard bragging about how he knew he was a person of interest in the case, but had never been interviewed. The family eventually hired a new private investigator named Sarah Stein, who told them that authorities would be searching for the car Molly's killer could have been driving. She'd received a tip that revealed a car that was similar to the one Moggy had seen had been buried in a former campground site in the Brookfield area. Investigators used ground-penetrating radar to search for the car and found compelling anomalies at multiple areas of interest that led them to search the campground again a few days later. This has led Sarah to believe something is buried in the area. In 2017, volunteers went to the campground to search for the suspected car. While state troopers were present, it was not considered an official part of the all-volunteer search effort. According to Heather, a man who physically resembles the composite sketch of the suspect still lives in the area, is a hunter and fisherman, and had access to the campground through a friendship with the property's former owner. She also said that heavy construction equipment needed to bury a car was available at the campground around the time Molly went missing and has since been sold. Investigators say Molly's murder case is still open. Since her sister's murder, Heather's sense of trust has been rocked. Molly's case has been profiled on such shows as Disappeared, America's Most Wanted, Unsolved Mysteries, and 48 Hours. Moggy and John Sr. have since started the Molly Bish Foundation, which is dedicated to improving safety awareness and prevention for all children. It distributes child identification booklets, and they helped pass a law that brought the Amber Alert system to Massachusetts. In October 2018, Molly's boyfriend died in a car crash. John Jr. has since become an EMT in memory of his sister. He also cites his parents' humanitarian work as an inspiration to him. To commemorate the 10th anniversary of Molly's disappearance, a vigil was held at Commons Pond. Those with information regarding the case are being asked to contact the Massachusetts State Police at 508-453-7575.
Number 2.
Bella Maria Laboucan-McLean grew up in Sturgeon Lake Cree First Nation, located approximately 250 kilometers north of Edmonton, Alberta. She had a large family, consisting of her parents, 3 older sisters and 2 younger brothers. Bella's parents are teachers who over the past 3 decades have worked to develop Cree curriculum for language revitalization, while her older sister, Melina Laboucan-Massimo, is an advocate for Indigenous rights who also speaks against the environmental degradation caused by the Alberta tar sands. Bella was described by friends and family as a vibrant woman with an outgoing personality. She was incredibly supportive and encouraging, yet was also known to speak the truth and be straightforward when needed. She had a positive outlook on life and would constantly remind those around her to appreciate the little things. Able to find the humor in most situations, she had the ability to brighten the mood of everyone around her. She was active on social media and was the go-to for friends looking to make the ideal music playlist for a party or event. However, while an extrovert, Bella was also known as a homebody who could be found at home with her family. Growing up, Bella was taught about the importance of her cultural tradition, both from her parents and her grandparents. With this, she became a talented dancer and worked toward honing her ability for making traditional Cree beadwork and art. The latter was especially of importance to her, as she hoped to one day become a designer who was able to blend her culture with modern fashion. Bella had a thorough education. She attended Portage College to fine-tune her skills in tanning hide and beadwork before pursuing a degree in textiles at the University of Alberta in Edmonton. In 2011, she would transfer to Humber College in Toronto and work toward a fashion arts degree. Her goal upon graduating was to apply to a graduate fashion program in London, England. While at Humber, she resided with classmates before moving in with a friend of Melina's. To earn money, she worked in retail while looking to move into designer merchandising, and she was known for organizing events for the school program. At the time of her death, she was just 25 years old. On the night of July 19, 2013, Bella was at a nightclub in Toronto. Early on July 20, she attended an after-party at a condo located at 21 Iceboat Terrace at Toronto's City Place. She traveled to the condo with 3 men and 2 women. At 4:55 a.m., a neighbor called Toronto police to report an unknown disturbance. When they arrived, they found the body of an unidentified female in the condo's communal area. As Bella had no ID on her, she remained unidentified for 12 hours. She had fallen 31 stories. As the body had no ID, police went door to door in the building trying to identify her and to see if anyone had witnessed what happened. When they arrived at the door to the condo, where Bella had last been seen, no one answered. At 5 p.m. on July 20, a man called police from the unit to report Bella is missing. This led to her being identified as the deceased female. An autopsy was performed on the body, which concluded she'd died of general blunt force trauma consistent with a fall. The death was deemed as sudden death, suspicious. Upon police searching the condo, they found Bella's wallet, purse, shoes and phone were still inside. Once they had identified everyone who had been in the condo that night, interviews were held, and all claimed not to have seen Bella go over the balcony. While police believe this to be improbable, given how small the apartment was, none of the 5 people have been named suspects, and, as such, their names have not been publicly released. No media advisory was put out by police about Bella's death. A week after her death, a memorial was held in Bella's memory at the base of the condo building. Once her body was released by the coroner, she was brought back to Alberta and buried in Sturgeon Lake Cree First Nation. To try and find new leads, police watched surveillance footage and followed up with the nightclub. They also had a forensic team do a mock-up of the unit from which Bella fell, but they were still unable to conclude how she had went over the balcony. In 2014, Toronto police approached an Ontario judge and received permission to obtain the cell phone records of those who had been in the condo that night. They were looking to see if any suspicious activity had occurred around the time Bella died. However, it's not been publicly stated if anything of value was found, and the case hit a standstill not long after. According to police, there isn't enough evidence to prove if Bella's death is the result of a homicide, a suicide, or if was the result of an accident. However, they still believe it to be suspicious. The case has not been transferred to homicide detectives. While the unit is currently monitoring it, the case is still in the hands of the 14 Division Criminal Investigation Bureau. Bella's family is currently working with Krista Big Canoe, who is the legal director with Aboriginal Legal Services of Toronto. She says the family has not received any police files or the autopsy report, despite their numerous requests for such documents. According to Krista, obtaining copies of the paperwork is essential in determining how to best move forward. Bella's case remains open, but is currently at a standstill until more information or evidence comes to light. Police say they've exhausted all available avenues of investigation. Theory 1. The main theory held by Bella's family and those who knew her is that her death was the result of a homicide. They find it suspicious that the 5 individuals who were in the condo the night she died claim to have not seen anything and feel they know more than they've let on. Theory 2. Suicide is a theory that has been brought up during the investigation. However, both police and Bella's family don't believe this to be the case. Her family doesn't think she would have jumped off the balcony, as she had no reason to harm herself. She had no history of depression or drug abuse, and she had left no note behind. Theory 3. As police are unable to conclude how Bella went over the balcony, they have considered the theory that her death could have been accidental. However, as those who had been in the condo claim to have not seen anything, and there are no other witnesses, there is no way to verify this. Bella's family consistently works to keep her memory alive. Each year, they hold a 4-day memorial for her on the land of her father's community, which is located about 4,000 kilometers from Toronto. Those who attend set up teepees and tents and take part in cultural activities. Those with information regarding the case are asked to contact the Toronto Police Service 14 Division.
Number 3.
Ebby Steppach was born on March 31, 1997. Growing up in Little Rock, Arkansas, she lived with her mother, Lori Jernigan, her stepfather, Michael Jernigan, her older brother, Trevor, and her younger sister, Harris. Described as bubbly and of a big heart, Ebby was known for going out of her way to help the ones she loved. She saw the best in people and loved anyone who came into her life with a fierceness that was unmatched. Those who she loved most of all were her grandparents. One of her favorite places to visit was the beach, and while there she would spend hours looking for seashells, which she would often gift to them. When it came to her education, Ebby spent most of her life attending charter schools before transferring to Central High School in Little Rock during her senior year, after which she planned to attend cosmetology school and obtain her real estate license. During this time in her life, she also got a job at the Foot Locker in McCain Mall, a move her family says coincided with a change in behavior. When she was 18 years old, Ebby started acting contrary to how those around her expected. Her decision to transfer schools had come after she began dating a new boyfriend, and while attending this new school she was known to occasionally be truant. However, her parents never addressed this with her, wanting to give her more independence. As well, she had moved out of her parents' house before starting her senior year, living between other family members' houses and that of a friend from her time at Lisa Academy. On the night of October 23, 2015, Ebby attended a house party where she claimed to have been raped. According to a text sent to a friend, Ebby said 4 men had been involved and that she had felt forced into the encounter. She also mentioned it had been recorded without her knowledge or consent. On October 24, she texted her stepfather to inform him of the rape and to say she wanted to go to police about it. During their conversation, she gave him the names of 2 of the men involved. She later texted the men implicated, threatening to report them to the authorities. On the same day, it's been reported that 2 one-minute calls were made from Ebby's cell phone to the Little Rock Police Department. However, they claim they have no records of these calls having been placed. Later on October 24, Michael called his stepdaughter and told her he would meet her at her grandparents' house, where she was reportedly staying at the time. He received no response and found she wasn't home when he arrived. When asked where Ebby had gone, her grandparents said she had left to go and meet him. However, the pair had made no arrangements to meet away from the house. Worried about Ebby, numerous family members tried to reach out to her but received no response to their messages. At around 2 p.m. on October 25, Trevor managed to get a hold of his sister, who said she was parked outside his house. Relieved, Trevor went to his front door but found neither his sister nor her car were outside. Upon calling her back, Ebby admitted she didn't know where she was and said she wasn't in a good state of mind. After hanging up from her phone call with her brother, Ebby was never heard from again. After speaking with his sister, Trevor immediately called the police, worried. They listed her as runaway and, as such, no search was conducted, despite her family saying she would never run away without keeping in contact with them. Concerned, the family conducted their own search for Ebby. A few days after she was last heard from, a security guard discovered her 2003 Volkswagen Passat running and abandoned in Chalamont Park at 20,600 Chalamont Drive. However, he didn't report it to police until 3 days later. Police searched Ebby's car upon it being called in and found her wallet and cell phone in the front seat, with clothes, makeup and her contact lenses also present. The keys were in the ignition, the battery was dead, and the gas tank was empty. At this point in the investigation, they still listed her as a runaway, as no signs of foul play or a struggle were present inside or outside of the vehicle. As they felt the police weren't taking Ebby's disappearance seriously, her family approached the media to help widen word of their missing loved one. This also highlighted how poorly local authorities were managing the case. When the Little Rock Police Department began investigating the case as more than a runaway, it was handed to the Violent Crimes Division. They changed Ebby's status to a missing person and, along with her family, handed out flyers across town. Searches were conducted of the park and the woods near where the car was discovered, but no evidence was found. Surveillance footage was also located about a week after Ebby went missing, which showed her car traveling along Cantrell Road in West Little Rock. However, where she was on the road has never been publicly released, nor if there was anyone else in the car with her. To help keep the case in the public eye, Ebby's family created a Facebook group to help spread awareness via social media. As they felt local police weren't taking the case seriously, Ebby's family hired private investigator Monty Vickers, who acted as a go-between between them and investigators. 5 months into the investigation, he spoke with the security guard who found her car. During their conversation, he shared that he believed he'd seen Ebby 3 different times before her disappearance. The first time he saw her, she was with 2 men and had asked the trio to leave, which they did without argument. The second time, she was with another man in the backseat of her car. The final time she was with more unknown men. While he isn't 100% certain the girl he saw was Ebby, he says she does resemble the images of Ebby he's been shown. In November 2015, the family offered up a $3,000 reward for information leading to her discovery. This would later be increased to $50,000. Around this time, Ebby's face and information were featured on billboards and banners across central Arkansas. The men implicated in Ebby's rape have been spoken to by investigators, but there have been no formal searches of their cell phones for the alleged video of her rape. In April 2016, volunteers searched for Ebby, beginning in the area near where her car was found and moving toward a wooded area near Markham and Bowman. This was followed by a police search of Chalamont Park in November 2016. During the multiple searches for Ebby, a team looking through a remote wooded area of Little Rock stumbled across a site consisting of clothes, handcuffs, a skeletal leg bone and a shoe that resembled one that the missing girl would wear. While initially believed to possibly be related to the case, it was later determined the leg bone belonged to an animal. To help spread word of the case, Laurie appeared on Dr. Phil. Ebby's disappearance was also featured on Nancy Grace. In May 2017, the case was reassigned to homicide detectives within the Little Rock Police Department. They sent out cadaver dogs to search Chalamont Park, but the dogs were unable to pick up on Ebby's scent. Along with the homicide unit, the department's cold case unit also examined the case and came up with numerous theories as to what could have happened to Ebby. On February 12, 2018, Laurie filed a complaint with the Little Rock Police Department, alleging a captain, a lieutenant and a sergeant had sent her threatening text messages, had yelled at her during questioning, and had refused to update her on the case during the early days of the investigation. She submitted recordings of conversations, text message threads, emails and provided witnesses as evidence. When asked why she had waited to file the complaint, Laurie explained she feared retaliation and thus waited until it had been transferred to detectives in another department. An investigation was conducted by department administrators, and it was found there was insufficient evidence of any mistreatment. However, it was noted that the officers implicated were no longer with the Major Crimes Unit. During the search for Ebby, her family looked into the possibility of her having been forced into sex trafficking. As such, on March 31, 2018, they held a fundraiser for PATH, also known as Parents Against Trafficking Humans. Marking Ebby's birthday, every dollar raised from those in attendance went to the organization, which provides services for survivors of assault and human trafficking. After the fundraiser, a birthday party was held for Ebby. In May 2018, the Cold Case Unit teamed up with the FBI and the Public Works Department to search a drainage pipe in Chalamont Park using robots with video cameras. They first entered the top drain, near where the car was found, and hit an obstruction approximately 70 feet down. They then went in the other way and hit another obstruction about 130 feet in. While neither were human remains, it piqued the interest of investigators, and thus the pipe was excavated. Upon the pipe being excavated, human remains were found. Ebby's family was notified of the discovery, and the remains were sent to the state crime lab, where they were determined to be those of the missing girl. The remains had been about 60 feet from where the car was discovered. While the medical examiner found a preliminary cause of death, it hasn't been publicly released. The discovery of Ebby's remains came after a foul odor had been reported coming from the pipe during the early parts of the investigation. The claim had come from a family friend who had searched the park not long after Ebby went missing. The woman who reported the smell to police felt they had initially shrugged her off, not showing up until an hour after she had first phoned in. Ebby family were unaware of the odor until after the remains were hidden. According to Laurie, she had known her daughter was dead before the remains were discovered. As of now, the case is currently with the Little Rock Police Department Cold Case Unit, who say it's an open homicide investigation. In 2017, Laurie participated in Closer to Home, Arkansas Takes Action, which was hosted by Attorney General Leslie Rutledge. Her feedback, along with that of others, resulted in the creation of a handbook that police give out to those whose loved ones have gone missing. Upon Ebby's remains being found, hundreds gathered for her memorial service at Christ Community Church on the campus of the Little Rock Christian Academy. Instead of flowers, the family asked that donations be made to non-profits HALOS Investigations, which is dedicated to locating missing and trafficked children, and THORN, an international anti-human trafficking organization that works to address the sexual exploitation of children. On November 4, 2018, Ebby's friends and family planted a tree in Chalamont Park in a move to show she would never be forgotten. The event was held by HALOS Investigations, which also promised to make donations to safe houses in Ebby's memory. Those with information regarding the case are being asked to call the Little Rock Police Department at 501-371-4829.
Number 4.
Suzanne Miller of London, Ontario was born in 1948. A dedicated mother of 3, she and her common-law husband resided together in the apartment block of 26 Gamage Street, near the city's army barracks. Suzanne was described as an introvert who loved to spend her free time cooking and sewing. In 1974, she was working a job at the local Metropolitan department store to help provide for her family. At the time of her disappearance and murder, she was 10 days shy of celebrating her 26th birthday. September 15, 1974 started out as a normal day for Suzanne Miller. She had made plans to meet at her sister's apartment and was last seen leaving her own around 1:30 p.m. However, she never arrived at her sister's place. The next day, Suzanne still hadn't returned home and hadn't been seen by anyone who knew her, so her husband reported her as missing to London police. Without much information to go on, police were initially working on the theory that Suzanne was a simple missing persons. Their first big break in the case came on September 23, 1974, when her 1972 blue Datsun Fastback was discovered abandoned at Argyle Mall, located just southeast of where Miller was last seen. Police weren't able to surmise much upon examination of the car, as there were no signs of blood or forensic evidence. On October 12, 1974, the missing persons case turned into a homicide investigation, as the decomposing body of Suzanne Miller was found in a wooded lot in Thorndale, Ontario, near the banks of the Thames River. The location was only a short drive northeast of London. Upon the discovery of Suzanne's body, the investigation became a joint one between the Ontario Provincial Police and London Police. The murder came at a time when there were many unsolved homicides in the London area. When found, the body was fully clothed, except for being barefoot. An autopsy surmised the case of death to have been blunt force trauma to the head by either a tool or metal instrument. There were no signs of sexual assault. While there was a purse containing identification found near the body, police waited a bit before publicly revealing the body belonged to Suzanne. The investigation into who killed Suzanne was in full swing. It's believed the murder occurred at another yet-to-be-discovered location, and her body was dumped in the wooded lot in an attempt to conceal it. On October 20, 1974, the visitation for Suzanne was held, where a potential person of interest made an appearance. A mystery man who was balding and smelt of alcohol came to observe the casket and donate $20 for flowers. He signed the register a friend. When asked of his relation to Suzanne, he replied he was simply a friend and proceeded to leave the funeral hall. As no one in attendance recognized him, he was followed out but disappeared into the street. Police were made aware of this unknown man and felt he might somehow fit into the investigation, so plainclothes officers attended the funeral in hopes of running into him. However, he never made an appearance. A sketch was produced from eyewitness accounts and released to the public, but the man's identity was never discovered. As the investigation drew on, police were having difficulty establishing a motive in the case. According to Suzanne's friends and family, there was no one they knew of who would want to hurt her, and while there were suspects in 1974, no arrests were made, and no names were ever released to the public. In hopes of gaining new leads, the OP offered a $5,000 reward for information leading to the resolution of the case. Despite this, the initial investigation stalled and the case became cold. In the 1990s, there was an attempt to revive the case, but no known progress was made. On July 19, 2018, the OP announced a revived effort to solve the murder with their Find My Killer campaign, which is meant to help reinvigorate and solve the case. Similar style campaigns have been used in Ontario in the past and have seen success. The campaign will use both social media and posters to put the case back in the public eye. A YouTube video was released, and Suzanne's image will be featured on London transit buses and on a vinyl-wrapped police minivan that will be strategically parked in various locations across the city. Police are hoping they'll be able to reach a wider amount of people than the initial investigation with these new tactics. During the press conference to announce to campaign, police would not say if they had any suspects or persons of interest in the case, but stated they feel the killer might be ready to talk, given they're getting older. As of August 12, 2018, the OP have said they've received numerous tips, but would not state if they have any new leads in the investigation. The murder of Suzanne Miller remains one of London's most notorious cold cases. In the YouTube video released by the OP, Suzanne's sister pleaded for the killer to come forward, stating she feels they must be feeling guilt over the case. The murder was included in the book Murder City, The Untold Story of Canada's Serial Killer Capital, 1959 to 1984. It was written by Western University professor and retired London police officer Michael Arntfield and covers London's unsolved murders. In the book, Arntfield shares that he feels the murder could be a personal cause homicide, meaning the murderer was motivated by personal reasons that have to do with their relationship with Suzanne. As of the 2018 press conference, the reward for information was increased to $50,000. Those with information regarding the case are asked to call the Ontario Provincial Police tip line at 1-844-677-5060 or send an email to smillertips@op.ca. Those wishing to remain anonymous can call Crime Stoppers at 1-800-222-8477.
Number 5.
In March of 2007, a surveyor followed a dirt road down to a brush-covered area a few miles from downtown Fort Myers, Florida. He was supposed to check out the area to assess its suitability for possible development, but those plans were derailed when he stumbled upon a grisly discovery: skeletal remains that looked distinctly human. After the surveyor reported his findings, local authorities searched the area and found a total of 8 skeletons scattered throughout a 200-yard radius. At first, detectives floated the theory that the remains were dumped there by a shady nearby crematorium, or even that they came from an old cemetery. However, as they collected evidence about the placement of the bodies and noted the lack of clothing or personal items, the investigation began to take a darker turn. All eyes were on Fort Myers as the case unfolded. Even John Douglas, a former FBI agent famous for pioneering the field of criminal profiling, weighed in. "To find 8 bodies in one place, that's really bizarre," he told NBC News, adding that the circumstances led him to believe that the remote area was a serial murderer graveyard. At the mention of a serial killer, local attention swiftly turned to Daniel Conahan, a man on death row. In 1999, Conahan was convicted of first-degree premeditated murder and kidnapping. By that point, he was also suspected of committing what came to be known as the Hog Trail Murd3rs, named for the wooded areas in which the bodies of the victims were found. Daniel Conahan was born in Charlotte, North Carolina in 1954 and was raised in Punta Gorda, Florida. As a teenager, Conahan realized he was gay, a fact that displeased his parents, who sent him to several psychiatrists. A loner in high school, Conahan enlisted in the Navy 4 years after he graduated, but it was a short-lived career. In 1978, he was accused of solicitation after attempting to lure fellow soldiers to a motel off base. Conahan was turned in and threatened with a court-martial, but nothing came of the case when the district attorney couldn't find anyone willing to testify against him. A few months later, Conahan made a sexual advance on another soldier, which resulted in a brawl. With a reputation as a troublemaker, the Navy discharged him. Conahan stayed in Chicago for the next 15 years before moving back to his hometown of Punta Gorda in 1993 to live with his elderly parents. In 1995, he became a licensed practical nurse, having graduated at the top of his class from Charlotte Vocational Technical Center. Not long after Conahan's return to Florida, mutilated male corpses began to turn up. The first was found in Punta Gorda in 1994. The man's genitals had been removed, and there was evidence of rope burns. He was never identified. 4 more male victims were discovered throughout the area in early 1996, each bearing similar injuries. With police fearing that there may be a serial killer on the loose, there was finally a break in the case in April of 1996. A 6th body was identified as 21-year-old Richard Allen Montgomery, a man who had gone missing just the day before he was found. With this tightened timeline, investigators were able to narrow in on a suspect. Witnesses came forward who indicated Daniel Conahan as a person of interest, including two men who had narrowly escaped him. One fled when Conahan's car got stuck driving down a dirt road, while the other, a man by the name of Stanley Burton, had barely survived the encounter. He told police that Conahan offered him money to pose for nude photographs. Conahan then drove Burton out to a remote wooded location, tied him to a tree, sexually assaulted him, and nearly strangled him to death. Conahan's house was searched, turning up evidence that linked him to both Stanley Burton and Richard Montgomery. Conahan was arrested and tried for the murder of Montgomery. While he awaited trial, yet another victim was found who had been killed in a similar manner. Conahan waived his right to a jury trial, allegedly because he feared that a jury of conservative Floridians would be biased against him as a gay man. His bench trial commenced in August of 1999. The star witness in the trial was Stanley Burton. Though Conahan's lawyer attacked Burton's credibility, coincidentally, he himself was a convicted pedophile, the evidence was damning. After just 25 minutes of deliberation, Judge William Blackwell found Conahan guilty of first-degree premeditated murder and kidnapping. He was sentenced to death. Daniel Conahan is currently housed at Union Correctional Institution in Ryford, Florida. He may be locked away, but the Hog Trail Murders still haunt southwestern Florida, especially since clues from the past keep turning up. Several more bodies matching Conahan's distinctive pattern of attack have been found since his incarceration, one in 2000, two in 2001, and one in 2002. Then in 2007, Floridians were rocked by the discovery of the mass burial site in Fort Myers. Stanley Burton had been attacked within a mile of that location. The timeline of the victims' deaths, the location of their bodies, and the manner of death led police to believe that Conahan was responsible, bringing his suspected number of victims up to 19. Today, several of the bodies linked to the case of the Hog Trail Murders remain unidentified. In February of 2020, the Charlotte County Sheriff's Office released a new rendering of the first known victim, a man who was found in early 1994. The updated rendering of what he would have looked like when he was alive was created with the help of Palm Beach County's Forensic Imaging Unit and new technology. Conahan may be behind bars already, but authorities hope they can identify this victim and put the decades-old cold case to rest. If you recognize him, reach out to the Charlotte County Sheriff's Office at 941-639-0013.
Number 6.
5 years later, it remains a murder that mystifies the Midlothian Police Department, the Texas Rangers and the FBI. And family members are still asking for closure. In the early morning hours of April 18, 2016, fitness instructor Terry Missy Bevers, 45, was opening up the hall of Midlothian's Creekside Church of Christ to host a Camp Gladiator exercise session when the mother of three was brutally murdered by an assailant who has yet to be identified. The murderer was at first identified as a man by authorities, but later they changed that to say it was undetermined whether it was a man or a woman. Surveillance video inside the church showed a person, later estimated to be about 5'8" in height, wearing full police gear and wielding a hammer that was later identified as the murder weapon. Bevers' husband, Brandon, was out of town on a fishing trip that day and was cleared of the crime. No family members have come under suspicion. Before the murder, the suspect is seen on video footage walking inside the church wearing police tactical gear and using a screwdriver or pry bar to open doors inside the church. Police found broken glass on the floor and discovered other signs of forced entry during the investigation of the crime scene. The individual was wearing what appeared to be a helmet, a heavy vest with the word police on the front and back, pants, gloves, and shin guards. The surveillance videos were motion-triggered and captured neither the assault nor all of the movements inside the building. The external cameras were not functioning at the time. The Midlothian Police Department considers this case an active investigation and continues to explore all leads that we receive, the police department said in a statement on social media. Midlothian police investigators are determined to see this case reach closure. Our agency receives tips and leads almost daily from various sources. Our investigators follow up on every credible piece of information. Please know that we will continue to thoughtfully protect the release of information about Missy's murder as long as this case remains open. MPD said it has added a retired federal agent to its team of investigators, and his primary responsibility is the examination of this case. Additionally, the department's new Criminal Investigation Division commander is an experienced homicide detective from a major Metroplex agency. He also will review the information gathered in this case. The expertise of these seasoned investigators, combined with the advancements in technology and new investigative techniques developed in law enforcement over the past 5 years, will hopefully lead to a satisfactory conclusion of this case, the department stated. It is our sincere belief that collaboration with the public is what will eventually lead us to solve this crime. We believe that someone may have a vital piece of information that to this date is unknowingly being withheld. We appeal to the community to please contact the Midlothian Police Department, regardless of how insignificant they may think their information may be. In its update, the MPD presented some points it would like to reiterate. The department does not consider this a cold case. Investigators are actively working new leads and existing case files. This includes coordination with multiple law enforcement agencies and forensics experts. To date, investigators have received over 3,000 tips and are still receiving tips from all over the world. Over the past year, investigators have traveled across Texas and other states to follow up on new leads. MPD staff has presented this case to several homicide investigators associations for review. No new substantial investigative work was generated due to these presentations. Investigators are still interested in a vehicle captured on video in the parking lot of a nearby business in the hours before the murder was committed. The vehicle appears consistent with a 2010 to 2012 Nissan Altima, 2010 to 2012 Infiniti G37 or similar vehicle. The vehicle of interest is driving slowly around the closed business. The driver turns the lights off and on multiple times and then parks for a short time before exiting the parking lot. The suspect observed on church surveillance equipment is wearing police tactical type clothing. The authenticity of the clothing is not known. Height analysis estimates the vertical distance from the floor to the top of the headwear of the suspect to be approximately 5'8". In the video surveillance, the suspect appears to have a unique walk or gait. The suspect's feet appear to turn outward away from the body, more predominantly on the right foot. Investigators are interested in persons who fall within or near this height range and have a similar walk or gait, or may have had a similar walk or gait during the time of this offense. It is possible the suspect's gait was caused by a temporary condition, injury or other factor, and the suspect will no longer exhibit this walk or gait. The Midlothian Police Department said there are several ways people can make an anonymous tip in this case. If the information provided leads to an arrest and conviction, persons that submit tips may be eligible for a cash reward. Tips can be delivered by calling Crime Stoppers of Ellis County at 972-937-7297. By calling the Midlothian Police Department Criminal Investigation Division at 972-775-7634.
Number 7.
Elizabeth had married her husband Sergio Barraza in 2014. The pair moved into their home in Texas in 2016. By all accounts, their relationship was great, and they were best friends. Elizabeth is said to have been a wonderful, kind person who would give up her own time for anybody, always helping people. From the description of Elizabeth's character, she seems the last person you would expect something like this to happen to. Edit to add, Elizabeth and Sergio lived alone with their dog. They didn't have children. Elizabeth and Sergio were part of a charity group called the 501st Legion. The group dresses as bad guys from Star Wars and carries out voluntary work in the local area. As part of her service in the group, Elizabeth dressed as a stormtrooper and visited children who were ill in hospital. Her and Sergio were huge Star Wars and Harry Potter fans. Together they would attend Comic-Con annually. Elizabeth worked as a data reporter for a pipeline inspection company. The shooting took place outside of Elizabeth's house in Cedar Walk Drive in Tomball, Texas, at 6:52 a.m. on Friday the 25th of January 2019. Sergio had left for work just 4 minutes before. Here's what we know: Elizabeth also known as Liz, was setting up an impromptu garage sale outside of her home to gather some extra money for an anniversary trip she was going to take with her husband Sergio. They had already packed their cases, and they were supposed to leave in 2 days' time. She had taken the day off work and hadn't told anybody about the garage sale bar a few co-workers, family and friends. Her and Sergio had woken up that morning and placed signs outside the front of their house, but she was waiting to be set up before advertising it anywhere. Sergio left for work at 6:48 a.m. The footage shows a person pull up in a truck at 6:52 a.m. and walk up to Liz. They speak to her for around 8 seconds before shooting her 3 times. Elizabeth then falls to the ground, and the unknown assailant stands over her and fires a 4th and final shot at Elizabeth's head before running back to their truck. The truck is now confirmed to be a Nissan Frontier 4X4 with a Pro 4X sticker attached. The police presume the truck is 2013 or newer and a dark color, possibly black. According to the police, this wasn't a common vehicle in that particular area. The suspect had pulled into the area minutes before Sergio left for work. They waited for him to leave before making their way to Elizabeth's house. The police say the suspect drives off and circles back around to ensure that Elizabeth is dead before leaving the area. The same car could be seen driving around the area and Elizabeth's home the night before her murder. The appearance of the suspect is heavily debated. Many say the suspect appears to be a man wearing a wig and a costume. Others believe it is a woman wearing what looks like a robe. People often compare the outfit to that of Princess Leia and Luke Skywalker. The police believe that this was a targeted attack intended for Elizabeth and not a case of mistaken identity. They say that whoever carried out the attack seemed to be aware of the Ring doorbell security camera the Barrazas had, that they seemed to know Elizabeth would be off work, and that they haven't ruled anyone out as suspects. They confirm that they have checked both Elizabeth and Sergio's devices and couldn't find any evidence that either of them were having an affair or being threatened. In January 2020, a warrant was filed by the Harris County Sheriff's Office. They believed the results of the warrant would provide answers, however the details of the warrant are unknown. Many speculate that the warrant could be linked to cell phone data which may prove who was in the area at the time. Again, this has never been confirmed. In July 2020, the police provided the last update available in this case. After further analysis of the surveillance footage, they confirm that Elizabeth can be heard cheerfully saying good morning to her killer. They believe this proves that Elizabeth didn't know who the killer was and furthers their belief that somebody was hired to kill Elizabeth. They also confirm that a robbery is ruled out in this case, as nothing was stolen from the table, including $100 in a cash box that remained untouched. The police seem to believe that at least 2 people are involved. They have mentioned that Elizabeth's case appears to be a hit in numerous interviews over the last 2 years. Deputy Michael Ritchie, the lead investigator, believes that the truck circled back around after Elizabeth was killed, so the murderer could inform the other person that the job was done. Many wonder if Elizabeth may have upset somebody in the 501st Legion. Whilst researching this case, I trawled the whole website to figure out who could and couldn't apply. As long as you're over 18 and have an interest in Star Wars, you're eligible. The applicant needs to create a professional outfit that replicates a character in the movie from the extensive approved list they provide before sending pictures to the Legion to be inspected. From what I can tell, Elizabeth wouldn't have had a say in this process, and there are thousands and thousands of members in the Legion. Elizabeth's husband is often suspected in this case. It is clear that it isn't Sergio carrying out the shooting in the surveillance footage, but many wonder if he was having an affair using a separate device or whether he arranged to have Elizabeth killed. The police insist he has been highly cooperative, and Sergio continues to speak to the police, but many can't shake the comments about the Ring doorbell security camera and the killer seeming to know that Elizabeth would be off work that day. Liz Barraza's brother tracked him down to say thank you and learned he was a Harris County Precinct 4 constable deputy. It's one of the many things the family has done to keep her generous spirit alive. Her father still wears a number Justice for Liz armband everywhere he goes. A reminder to him of the one question he once answered: who killed his daughter? She didn't deserve this. "She didn't do anything to deserve this," Newell said. After looking at the video, investigators believe the killer could be a man or a woman. There's a $20,000 reward at Crime Stoppers of Houston because of a donation from Peter Mayhew's foundation. He played Chewbacca in Star Wars. If you can help, call 713-222-TIPS.